My daughter-in-law once made me pay $20 to hold my own grandson for 15 minutes. She called it a visitation coordination fee. What she never bothered to check, in the 18 months she spent running my house like a business she owned, was whose name was actually on the deed. Some things about a family only reveal themselves after everyone has stopped pretending to be polite. This is one of those stories. I should tell you up front that some names and details here have been adjusted for privacies and for the sake of telling this properly. The bones of it are true, and the lesson underneath it is truer than anything else I could tell you today. My name is Walter Cole. I'm 63. For 31 years, I ran the maintenance division at a regional freight terminal outside Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, the kind of job where nobody claps for you. But if you do it wrong, trucks stop moving and people notice fast. I retired 4 years ago with a pension, a paid-off house on Larkspur Lane, and a wife, Eleanor, who has put up with me through 38 years of marriage and somehow still laughs at my jokes, which is either love or an extremely convincing performance she's been running since 1988. We have one son, Nathan, 34 years old, married to a woman named Priya for the last 6 of those years, and the father, as of 2 years ago, of the single greatest thing that has ever happened to my life, a boy named Milo, my grandson. I want you to understand something before I tell you what Priya did, because if you don't understand this part, none of what comes after will land the way it should. I did not have a complicated relationship with my son growing up. Nathan was easy, quiet, thoughtful, the kind of kid who read in the back seat instead of asking, "Are we there yet?" I coached his rec league soccer team for 4 years even though I don't understand soccer, drove him to violin lessons 40 minutes each way for 6 years even though I can't carry a tune, and co-signed his first apartment lease when he was 22 and had exactly enough credit history to qualify for a library card. None of that was a burden. That's just what a father does. I never once kept score. Priya came into his life when he was 26. Smart woman, sharp-edged in the way people are when they've had to fight for everything they have. She grew up with less than we had, and I respected that about her. Respected the hustle in her, the way she'd built a marketing consultancy out of a laptop, and sheer stubbornness by the time she was 30. Eleanor liked her from the start. I liked her too, if I'm honest, in the cautious way you like someone you can tell is going to run the household eventually, whether you vote on it or not. What I did not see coming, what none of us saw coming, not even Nathan, I don't think, was what happened after Milo was born. Here is the pain at the center of this story, and I want to say it plainly instead of dancing around it. My grandson is the only grandchild I will ever have. Eleanor and I found that out the hard way 4 years before Milo, when our daughter Renee, younger than Nathan by 3 years, died in a car accident on Route 15 during an ice storm in February. She was 29. She had been trying, for 2 years before that, to have a baby of her own, and it hadn't happened, and then it never would. I don't say that for sympathy. I say it because it matters to everything that comes after. When Milo was born, something in Eleanor and me that had gone quiet since Renee's funeral came back online. We didn't love him instead of Renee. We loved him because of everything Renee never got to have. That boy became, without either of us ever saying it out loud to each other, the center of gravity for whatever years we had left. Which is exactly why what Priya did over the following 2 years cut as deep as it did. It started small enough that I told myself I was imagining things. A visit that got rescheduled twice. A comment from Priya about how Milo needed structure and consistent caregivers rather than too many hands. A family group text where Nathan would propose Sunday dinner and Priya would counter with a reason it wasn't a good week. I chalked it up to new parent anxiety. Eleanor, who has better instincts about people than I do, chalked it up to something else entirely, but she didn't say so out loud for almost a year. That's a mistake I understand now. I made the same one myself. The visits didn't stop, exactly. They just started costing something. The first time it happened, I genuinely thought I'd misheard her. Milo was 14 months old. Nathan had a work trip, and Priya called to ask if I could come by on a Wednesday afternoon to help watch him while she took a client call. Of course, I said. I was in the car in 11 minutes. When I got there, She met me at the door with her phone already out, one of those payment apps open on the screen, the little request icon glowing. "I really appreciate this, Walter," she said, in the bright, efficient voice she uses with vendors. "I've been paying our regular sitter 20 an hour, so I'll just Venmo you for the 2 hours. That way it's fair to everyone." I laughed. I actually laughed, because I thought it was a joke, the kind of thing you say ironically to your father-in-law. She didn't laugh back. She held the phone a little higher, waiting. "Priya," I said, "I'm not going to take money to watch my own grandson." "It's not really about the money," she said. "It's about treating it like what it is, a service. That way there's no confusion later about expectations, about frequency, about anything." She smiled when she said it. The kind of smile that's doing a lot of work to look like warmth. It protects everyone. I didn't take the money that day. I told her to keep her $20 and went inside and spent 2 hours on the living room floor building block towers with a 14-month-old who shrieked with joy every time one toppled over. And for those 2 hours I told myself it had been a strange, isolated moment, the kind of thing you forget about by dinner. It was not isolated. It was the opening move. Over the following months, the fee became a fixture, quietly. The way a leak in a roof becomes a fixture. You don't notice the exact day it started. You just notice one afternoon that the ceiling stained. Priya began referring to any time I spent with Milo as coverage. The vocabulary of a childcare marketplace instead of a family. She built what she called a care rotation spreadsheet. Nathan showed it to me once, apologetically, like a man showing you a wound he didn't cause but couldn't hide either, with columns for the professional sitter, for Priya's mother when she visited from Ohio, and for me and Eleanor, all logged under the same header. Caregivers. Under my name in the notes column she'd written, "Grandpa, available, but needs clear boundaries on duration. Charge standard rate to avoid overreliance." Overreliance. That was the word she used for a grandfather wanting to see his only grandchild. The fee climbed. $20 became $25. "To match inflation adjustments in the rate," she said, entirely straight-faced, as if she were renegotiating a vendor contract instead of talking to the man who'd once put a roof over her husband's childhood. When I balked, she didn't argue. She simply reduced the visits. A month where I used to see Milo 3 times shrank to once. Then, some months, not at all, always for a reason that sounded, on its surface, entirely reasonable. "Milo has a cold. Milo's on a new nap schedule. We're trying to limit new environments right now for his development." Every excuse alone was plausible. Stacked together, over 2 years, they added up to something else. My grandson's world was being carefully, deliberately narrowed until I was on the outside of it, looking in through a toll booth, his stepmother in spirit, because that's genuinely what Priya had made herself. Gatekeeper of a child who wasn't biologically hers to gatekeep any more than mine to overreach on, had installed between us. I want to tell you about the day I finally understood how far this had gone. Because it wasn't the money. The money was never really the point, and I think some part of me knew that from the very first Venmo request. It was a Saturday in April, and I'd driven the 40 minutes to Nathan and Priya's house in Camden Township with a birthday present for Milo. His second birthday, a wooden train set. I'd spent 3 weekends building by hand in my garage, sanding every axle myself so there wouldn't be a single splinter anywhere a 2-year-old's hands could find. Priya answered the door, not Nathan. She was holding her phone, and behind her, through the front window, I could see the party already in full swing. Balloons, a bounce house rented for the backyard, a dozen kids from what I assume was daycare, and adults I didn't recognize holding plastic cups of lemonade. "Walter," she said, and there was something in her voice already, a note I hadn't heard from her before, careful and rehearsed. "This is so sweet, but I should have called you. This is actually just the daycare friend group party. We're doing the family celebrations separately, next weekend, smaller, quieter, better for Milo's sensory regulation with this many people already here." I stood on that porch holding a train set. I'd spent 3 weekends sanding smooth, listening to my grandson laugh somewhere behind her, in a yard full of children I'd never met, and I understood, with a clarity that arrived like cold water down the back of my collar, that there might not be a family celebration next weekend. There might never have been one planned at all. Priya, I said, keeping my voice even because I have spent 31 years learning how to keep my voice even when a supervisor is wrong and doesn't know it yet. I would like to see my grandson on his birthday. She glanced back over her shoulder, toward the yard, toward the noise, and something flickered across her face. Not guilt, exactly. Calculation. Of course, she said finally. Come in. 10 minutes, though, okay? We don't want to disrupt his rhythm during the party. 10 minutes. On his birthday. After a 40-minute drive and 3 weekends in my garage, I stayed for 11. Because Milo grabbed my finger with his whole fist the second he saw me and would not let go, and some rules a grown man is allowed to break by exactly 1 minute. That night, driving home in the dark on Route 15, the same road, though I try not to think about that too often, Eleanor called me on speakerphone to ask how the party went, and I found I couldn't answer her right away. When I finally did, my voice came out rougher than I intended. Maggie. I said that's my nickname for her, from a joke 30 years old, that neither of us remembers the origin of anymore. I think we need to have a serious conversation about our son's wife. I've thought that for a year, Eleanor said quietly. I just didn't want to be the one to say it first. That conversation, on the phone in the dark on Route 15, was where this story really begins. Because up until that night, I had been the kind of man who absorbs things, who tells himself it's not worth the conflict, who keeps writing checks, sometimes literal ones, over the years, when Nathan needed help, and never once asks what he's actually buying with all that accommodation. I want to tell you now, before we go further, what I eventually learned about exactly what Priya and Nathan had been building behind that toll booth of coordination fees and sensory regulation and caregiver rotations. Because the visitation fee, it turns out, was never the whole plan. It was the smallest, cheapest piece of something a great deal larger and a great deal more expensive than $25 an hour. But before I get to that, I need to take you back further still, back to 1994, to a folding chair in a hospital hallway and a decision Eleanor and I made that neither Nathan nor Priya knew existed, and that would end up mattering more than either of them could have possibly imagined. Eleanor was 26 weeks pregnant with Renee when the doctors found the growth on my kidney. Not Eleanor's, mine. I want you to sit with that timing for a second because it shaped everything that came after. A 29-year-old man, a wife 6 months pregnant with their second child, a 3-year-old, Nathan, already running around the house, and a doctor telling me the word mass in a tone doctors reserve for words they don't want to have to upgrade to worse ones later. It turned out benign. I want to say that clearly, so nobody spends the rest of this story worried about it. But for the 11 days between the scan and the biopsy results, Eleanor and I did not know that. We sat in folding chairs in a hospital hallway in Harrisburg and had the kind of conversation you only have when you think you might be running out of time to have it. And out of that conversation came a decision that, at the time, felt almost superstitious in its caution, the kind of thing you do not because you expect to need it, but because doing it makes the waiting easier to survive. We put the house on Larkspur Lane, which we had bought 2 years earlier with money from Eleanor's late father's modest estate and 8 years of my overtime pay, into something called a revocable living trust. Our attorney at the time, a careful, unhurried man named Otis Bram, who is retired now but whose younger partner, a woman named Denise Okafor, still handles our affairs today, walked us through it in about 40 minutes. Eleanor and I would remain the trustees, meaning nothing about our daily lives would change. We could sell the house, refinance it, renovate it, do anything an owner could do, for as long as we were both alive. The trust simply specified what happened to the property after we were both gone, and, crucially, it specified who was allowed to make decisions about that property, and under what circumstances, while we were still living. At 29, sitting in that hallway badly frightened, I told Otis Bram I wanted my children protected no matter what happened to me. He nodded slowly, the way careful men do, and wrote something on a legal pad and said, "Then let's build it, so nothing anyone does to your children or your children do to each other can ever put you and Eleanor at risk of losing your home while you're both still living in it." Let's build it so nobody can act on your behalf without both of you agreeing to it. In writing, in front of a notary, no exceptions. I remember thinking that sounded excessive. I remember Otis Bram looking at me over his glasses and saying, "Mr. Cole, I've been doing this 30 years. It is never excessive." I signed it not thinking, even for a second, about a daughter-in-law I hadn't met yet, or a grandson who wouldn't be born for another 26 years. I signed it because I was scared, and because it felt like the responsible thing a father does for his family when the future goes uncertain on him without warning. Neither Nathan nor, later, Priya, ever knew that document existed. Why would they? It never came up. There was no reason for it to come up, not until a Tuesday morning 18 months into what I'd started, privately, calling the toll booth years. When Priya sat across from me at my own kitchen table with a folder of her own, and a plan that would have made Vanessa from a story I once heard blush at how far she was willing to take it. That's where I need to slow down and tell this properly. From the beginning of what I now understand was never really about a fee to hold my grandson. It was about who was going to end up owning the house. That fee was quietly, patiently clearing a path toward point one. Eleanor found the retirement pamphlet on the kitchen table 3 days before everything came apart, and neither of us understood at the time what we were actually looking at. It was a Thursday in late September, the kind of afternoon where Pennsylvania hasn't decided yet whether it's still summer or already fall, and I came in from the garage. I'd been restaining the porch railing, a job I'd been putting off since July, to find Eleanor standing at the counter with a glossy brochure in her hands, her reading glasses pushed up into her gray hair, her expression somewhere between confused and alarmed. "Walter," she said, "did you request information from Brightwater Senior Living?" I hadn't. I'd never heard of Brightwater Senior Living. It was a 2-bedroom independent living community 40 minutes north of us, near Lewisburg, with photographs of smiling gray-haired couples playing shuffleboard and a monthly fee printed in small type at the bottom that made my chest tighten just reading it. "No," I said. "Who sent that?" "It came addressed to both of us," Eleanor said, turning the envelope over. "But look at the return contact listed inside for questions about this inquiry." I took the pamphlet from her and found the small paragraph on the back panel, the kind of fine print nobody reads until they have a reason to. Inquiry submitted by Priya Cole on behalf of Walter and Eleanor Cole. I stood in my own kitchen holding a brochure for a retirement community I had never asked to receive, submitted by a woman who had, as far as I knew, no earthly reason to be researching where her husband's parents should live out their remaining years. Eleanor and I looked at each other across the counter, and I watched the same understanding arrive in her face that had been building quietly in the back of my own mind for months. "This isn't the first strange thing," Eleanor said carefully. "Is it?" It wasn't. Over the prior 6 weeks, in fact, a small disconnected collection of oddities had accumulated that I'd been filing away individually instead of looking at as a set, the way you don't notice a single loose thread until you realize your whole sleeve is coming apart. Nathan had started stopping by more often, always with Priya, always cheerful, always full of questions that seemed innocuous in isolation. "How's the knee holding up, Dad? You thinking about downsizing eventually? Don't you two rattle around in this big house now that it's just the two of you?" Priya had taken photographs of the living room once, on her phone, saying she wanted design inspiration for their own place. A claim that made no sense, since their house in Camden Township was a sleek, modern build that looked nothing like our 1970s colonial with its wide oak trim, and Eleanor's collection of hand-thrown pottery on every shelf. And there was the morning, 3 weeks earlier, when I'd come home from the hardware store to find my filing cabinet in the study, the one where I keep insurance documents, tax returns, and, though I hadn't thought to check it in over a year, a folder simply labeled E-State, slightly ajar. Not broken into, not ransacked, just ajar, the drawer not fully closed the way it always was when I left it, the way 38 years of habit had trained me to notice without even trying. I hadn't said anything to Eleanor about the filing cabinet at the time. I'd told myself I was misremembering whether I'd closed it properly. Standing there with the Brightwater pamphlet in my hands, I stopped telling myself that. I think I said slowly. We should ask Nathan to come by. Just Nathan. Not this weekend. Tomorrow, if he can. Eleanor's eyes were sharp on mine. You think something's happening? I think, I said. $25 an hour to hold my own grandson was never really about $25 an hour, and I think it's time I found out what it actually was about. Nathan came Friday evening, alone, the way I'd asked. He looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep, the particular exhaustion of a man caught between two people he loves and doesn't know how to stand in front of both at once. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where, 3 weeks later, Priya would set down a folder of her own and change the entire shape of this story. Nathan, I said, Priya requested information from a retirement community about your mother and me. Did you know about that? Something moved across his face, not surprise, exactly. Recognition arriving reluctantly, like a man being shown a photograph he'd rather not look at. She mentioned looking into some options, he said carefully. For down the road. Nothing urgent, Dad. Just planning ahead. Planning ahead for what, exactly? Eleanor asked. And her voice had gone very quiet, very level, the tone I'd learned in 38 years of marriage to take more seriously than shouting. Nathan looked down at his hands on the table. We think, that eventually this house is going to be a lot for the two of you to manage. And she thinks it makes sense to start looking at options now, before there's a crisis, instead of scrambling later. Nathan. I kept my voice level, the way I'd kept it level through 31 years of telling men twice my size that no, the shipment count was wrong, and yes, we were going to recount it. Your mother had knee surgery 8 months ago. She is fully recovered. I retired at 59 in good health, and I intend to die in this house at a very advanced age, ideally after annoying you both for several more decades. Where is this coming from? He was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, something in his voice had shifted. Not quite confession, but close to it, the sound of a man realizing, mid-sentence, that he no longer entirely believed the thing he was about to say. Priya's been under a lot of pressure at work, he said. Her consultancy lost 2 major clients this year. Things have been tight. She's been talking about ways to simplify, consolidate. She thinks if you two moved somewhere smaller and more manageable, it would take some pressure off everyone, financially and otherwise. There it was. Not stated outright. Nathan wasn't capable, I don't think, of stating it outright, not yet, not to my face. But there it was all the same. The shape of something underneath the pamphlet and the photographs in the filing cabinet left slightly ajar, financially and otherwise. Nathan, I said, look at me. He did. And for just a moment I saw the boy who used to read in the back seat of the car, quiet and thoughtful and entirely unequipped for whatever he'd let himself get pulled into. Is Priya planning something involving this house? No, he said, too quickly. And then more slowly, watching my face the way you watch a face, when you're testing whether a lie has landed. I don't think so. Not like that. I did not believe him. I don't think, looking back, that Nathan entirely believed himself either. But I let it go that evening because I have learned, across 63 years, that the moment you let someone know exactly how much you've noticed is the moment they stop leaving the drawer ajar and start being careful. And I needed them, for just a little while longer, to keep being careless. That night, after Nathan left, Eleanor and I sat on the back porch in the cooling September dark, the porch railing still smelling faintly of fresh stain, and she asked me the question that had been sitting between us all evening. What are you going to do, Walter? I thought about Milo's second birthday party, 11 minutes on a porch instead of an afternoon in a yard. I thought about a spreadsheet with my name filed under caregivers, and the word overreliance written in the notes column beside it. I thought about 31 years of counting inventory, of knowing exactly how a shortage looks before the official count ever catches up to it. I think, I said, we should call Denise Okafor on Monday morning. I want to see our trust documents again. I want to make absolutely certain of exactly what we built back in 1994 and exactly how solid it still is. Eleanor took my hand in the dark, her grip firmer than I expected from a woman who'd spent 8 months rebuilding strength in a surgically repaired knee. And if it's not us they're planning around, she said. If it's Milo. If they're planning to use that boy the same way they've been using this fee, as leverage, as a lever to move us out of the way, then, I said, and something cold and clear settled into my chest. The specific stillness I'd feel again 3 weeks later at my own kitchen table. Then I am going to make very sure they understand exactly whose name has been on every room of this house since before either of them had any idea I existed. Neither of us slept well that night. But by Monday morning I had a call scheduled with Denise Okafor, and by the following Tuesday, the Tuesday that would end with a folder on my kitchen table and a plan I never asked for spread out in front of me, I would understand exactly how far past a $25 babysitting fee this had already gone. Denise Okafor's office smelled like fresh paper, and the particular brand of coffee lawyers seemed to buy by the industrial drum. I'd been in that office maybe 6 times in 30 years, a will update after Renee died, a property line question in 2011, the occasional 5-minute call when Eleanor and I wanted to make sure we were still doing right by our own future. Denise had taken over the practice from Otis Bram when he retired, and she had his same unhurried way of looking at you before she spoke, like she was giving the room one last second of quiet before whatever she said next rearranged something in it. "Walter," she said, waving me into the chair across from her desk. "Eleanor not joining us today? She's home. Her knee's been acting up in this weather. I'll fill her in." I sat and I didn't waste time getting to it, because I have never been a man who enjoys small talk when something's sitting heavy in his chest. "Denise, I need you to pull our trust file, the one from 1994. I want to know exactly what's in it. And I want to know if anything about it has ever been altered, questioned, or accessed by anyone other than Eleanor and me." Something shifted behind her eyes, not alarm exactly, but the particular alertness of a professional who's just heard a question she takes seriously. "Has something happened?" I told her. Not everything, I didn't have everything yet, but the shape of it. The visitation fee that had crept from $20 to $25 over 2 years. The care rotation spreadsheet with my name filed under overreliance. The 11 minutes on a porch on my grandson's birthday. The Brightwater Senior Living pamphlet addressed to us both, but submitted, according to its own fine print, by Priya. The filing cabinet drawer left slightly ajar. Nathan's admission, half admission, really, that Priya had been under financial pressure and had been talking about ways to simplify. Denise listened without interrupting, the way good attorneys do, taking notes in a small, precise hand. When I finished, she set her pen down and pulled up our file on her monitor. "The trust is exactly as Otis drew it up in 1994, she said after a moment, "untouched. You and Eleanor are sole trustees. No amendments, no requests for amendments. Nothing on file suggesting anyone's tried to access or alter it." She paused, scrolling. "Which tells me one of 2 things, Walter. Either whatever's being planned doesn't yet involve trying to touch the actual legal ownership, or someone's operating on an assumption about that ownership that's about to turn out to be badly wrong." "Explain that to me plainly," I said. "I've had enough careful phrasing this month to last me a decade." She leaned back. "In my experience, when family members start floating retirement communities and simplifying language without ever once asking the actual owners what they want, it's very rarely because they've done their homework. It's because they've made an assumption, usually the assumption that they're the default heirs, that the house is functionally already theirs in every way that matters except the paperwork, and that getting the current occupants to move somewhere smaller is just a logistics problem to solve, not a legal one." She tapped the screen. "Nobody who'd actually read this trust would think that. Which tells me nobody involved in this has read it. Which means, Walter, whatever they're building it on a foundation that doesn't exist." I sat with that for a moment, feeling something settle in my chest that was almost relief. Except relief wasn't quite the right word for learning your own daughter-in-law had spent 2 years quietly maneuvering around a house she had never actually had any claim to. "What do?" I asked, "if I'm right and there's more coming?" "Document everything," Denise said, and her voice took on the same measured clarity I'd remember, days later, being grateful for. "Every fee request, every canceled visit. That pamphlet, do not throw it away. and check the postmark and any account information you can find in the mail metadata. If your filing cabinet really was accessed, we may want to talk about a discrete camera in that study, the same way you'd protect a warehouse against unexplained shrinkage. And Walter, if anyone at all, asks you or Eleanor to sign anything, for any reason, no matter how small it sounds, you call me before you sign a single line. Estate planning language, refinancing language, power of attorney language, all of it goes through this office first, every single time. No exceptions, the same as Otis built it. I drove home with her words sitting in my chest like ballast, steadying but heavy. I did not know yet how soon I'd need every piece of that advice. 2. The camera arrived by mail on a Thursday. A small, discreet unit Denise's office had recommended, the kind meant for nanny monitoring rather than anything more dramatic, and I mounted it myself on the bookshelf across from my study desk, angled to cover the filing cabinet without being obvious about it. I felt faintly ridiculous doing it. A 63-year-old man wiring a hidden camera into his own home office because of a babysitting fee that had crept up $5 an hour. But I have spent enough years trusting instincts that turned out to be right in freight yards and loading docks to know better than to override one now, just because it embarrassed me. It took 11 days to prove itself worth the embarrassment. I was at the hardware store on a Tuesday afternoon, replacing a cracked hose bib, nothing more dramatic than that, when my phone buzzed with a motion alert from the study camera. I almost ignored it. Eleanor was home. It was probably her, dusting, or the cat we'd been feeding since it wandered up in June, jumping onto the desk chair the way it liked to do in the afternoon sun. It wasn't the cat. I pulled up the footage on my phone right there in the plumbing aisle and watched Priya let herself into my study using a key I had never given her, sit down at my desk, and open the estate folder in my filing cabinet with the calm, unhurried efficiency of someone who had done this before and expected to do it again. She photographed pages, methodically, one at a time, laying each document flat, angling her phone, checking the image, moving to the next. I watched her get to the property deed, the original 1994 deed, not the trust paperwork, which Denise's office actually holds a copy of and which I don't keep filed at home, photograph it, then frown slightly at something, flip it over, check the back, and set it down with a small, dismissive shake of her head, as if it hadn't told her what she'd hoped it would. She was in my study for 19 minutes. She left everything looking undisturbed, refiled precisely. Drawer closed all the way this time. If I hadn't had that camera, I would never have known. I called Denise from the parking lot of the hardware store, the hose bib forgotten in the passenger seat, my hands not quite steady on the phone. She has a key to my house, I said, before Denise had even finished saying hello. A key I never gave her. She let herself in and photographed my estate documents. There was a pause on the line, the sound of Denise absorbing this the way careful people absorb bad news, without letting it rush them into a reaction they'll regret. "Send me the footage," she said. "Today if you can. And Walter, I want you to think back. When could she plausibly have gotten a key made? Has there been any point in the last year where a spare was out of your control, even briefly?" I thought about it in the parking lot, running back through months the way I used to run back through inventory logs, looking for the day a discrepancy started. And then I remembered, 6 weeks earlier, a Sunday afternoon, Priya had come by to drop off some of Milo's outgrown clothes for the church donation bin, and Eleanor, whose knee had been bothering her that particular week, had asked Priya to grab the spare house key off the hook by the garage door, so she could let herself out through the side entrance while carrying the boxes rather than making Eleanor get up. Priya had been alone in the mudroom with that key for perhaps 4 minutes while Eleanor sorted through a closet upstairs. 4 minutes is more than enough time to press a key into a piece of putty, or simply to photograph it and order a duplicate online through any of a dozen services that don't ask a single question. "I think I know," I said quietly. "All right," Denise said. "Here's what we're going to do, Walter. And I need you to trust me on the order of operations, because timing matters enormously in situations like this. We are not confronting anyone yet. Not Priya, not Nathan. The moment they know you're aware, they either accelerate whatever the actual plan is, or they Cover their tracks so thoroughly we lose the paper trail we need. I want you to keep behaving exactly as you have been. Keep paying the fee if she asks for it. Document every payment, every text, every request. Keep the camera running. And I want you to give me a week to do some quiet digging of my own. Because, Walter, I have a feeling this isn't just about a house anymore. And I want to know the whole shape of it before either of us moves. I didn't like it. Every instinct in me wanted to drive straight to Camden Township and lay every card on the table right there in Nathan and Priya's driveway. But 31 years of freight management teaches you something particular about patience, that the fastest way to catch a shortage is not to announce you're counting, but to keep counting quietly until the pattern is undeniable. I gave Denise her week 3. What Denise found when she called me back 8 days later was worse than a photograph deed. It was worse, honestly, than almost anything I'd let myself imagine in the increasingly sleepless nights between that call in the hardware store parking lot and the Tuesday everything finally surfaced. "Walter," she said, and there was something careful in her voice, the tone of an attorney about to deliver news she knows is going to land like a blow. "I need you to sit down for this, and I need you to let me get through all of it before you react. Because there's a lot here and it matters that you have the full picture." I sat down at the kitchen table, the same table, though I didn't know it yet, where a very similar conversation would play out with Priya herself in a matter of days. "I did some digging into Priya's consultancy," Denise said. "Public filings, court records, the kind of information that's a matter of record once you know where to look. Walter, her business isn't just struggling, it's insolvent. She's carrying approximately $91,000 in business debt, a combination of a defaulted business line of credit, 2 vendor lawsuits already filed against her LLC, and a significant tax liability from underpaid quarterly estimates going back 2 years. There's a judgment lien already recorded against her business assets from one of those vendor suits." I felt something cold settle into my stomach. "Does Nathan know?" "I don't know what Nathan knows," Denise said, "but here's the part that connects to you directly. 6 weeks ago, someone using Priya's name applied for a home equity line of credit, not against her and Nathan's house in Camden Township, Walter, against yours, against 414 Larkspur Lane." The room went very quiet around me. I could hear the refrigerator humming, the cat somewhere upstairs, Eleanor's footsteps pausing in the hallway as she caught something in my expression through the doorway and came to stand beside me, one hand on my shoulder. "That's not possible," I said slowly. "I never applied for anything, neither did Eleanor." "I know," Denise said. "The application was denied. The lender's underwriting flagged inconsistencies in the ownership documentation almost immediately because their records search turned up the trust, which the application never disclosed or accounted for. Whoever filed it either didn't know about the trust or hoped it wouldn't surface in time. The application listed you as the sole applicant, using information that would have required access to your social security number, your mortgage history, information from documents in that filing cabinet, Walter. I believe the study visit you caught on camera wasn't the only one. I think it may have been a follow-up visit, checking on something, or gathering a piece she was still missing." I thought about the moment on the footage where Priya had frowned at the back of the deed, set it down with that small, dismissive shake of her head, as though it hadn't told her what she needed. I understood now, with a clarity that made my hands go cold, exactly what she'd been looking for and hadn't found, any indication that the house could be leveraged the way she needed it to be. "There's one more thing," Denise said, and her voice dropped further. "Careful, in the specific way people are careful when they're about to say something that will change how you see someone you love. The lender's fraud department flagged the application for review before denying it, which means there's a record of who they contacted to verify identity during the process. Walter, Nathan's name appears as a secondary contact on that application, not as an applicant, as someone the lender's fraud team reached out to verify certain details before they rejected it. I don't know what he told them. I don't know what he understood he was helping with when they called. But he was in this far enough to be listed." Eleanor's hand tightened on my shoulder. Neither of us said anything for a long moment. Denise, I finally said. I need you to tell me plainly. If this had gone through, if that credit line had been approved before anyone caught it, what would it have meant for this house? It would have meant a lien against your property for whatever amount was approved, filed under your name, without your knowledge or consent, that you would have had to fight through the courts to remove. An expensive, slow, exhausting process, Walter, the kind that takes years and legal fees most people can't easily absorb. And if that debt had gone unpaid, which given what I've found about the rest of her finances seems likely, it could ultimately have put your home at risk of forced sale to satisfy the debt, not immediately, not easily. But it's exactly the kind of financial trap people build when they're drowning, and they've decided someone else's asset is the life raft, whether that someone agreed to lend it or not. I sat in my kitchen with my wife's hand on my shoulder, thinking about a spreadsheet with my name filed under caregivers, about 11 minutes on a porch, about $91,000 in debt, and a denied application with my son's name attached to it as a contact. And I understood, finally, completely, what the visitation fee had actually been from the very beginning. It was never really about money, $20 or $25 at a time. It was about training me, slowly, patiently, to accept being managed. To accept that access to what I loved most in the world came with terms someone else got to set. Once you've conditioned a person to accept that framework for something as sacred as their own grandchild, asking them to accept it for a house, for a mere asset, is a much smaller leap than it should be. What do we do? I asked, and my voice came out rougher than I wanted it to. We finish gathering everything, Denise said, quietly, for a little while longer. And then, Walter, we make sure that when this comes to a head, and I think it's going to come to a head soon, because insolvent people under this kind of pressure don't stay patient forever, we make absolutely certain everyone in that family understands, all at once, exactly whose name has been on every deed, every trust document, and every room of that house since 1994, long before Priya Cole ever had a reason to learn it. She was right about the timing. It came to a head 11 days later, on a Tuesday morning, when Priya showed up at my kitchen table with a folder of her own, and a plan she believed, right up until the moment it collapsed in front of her, was already finished. The Tuesday morning it finally came to a head started, of all things, with pancakes. Eleanor was at the stove, and I was reading the paper the old-fashioned way, actual newsprint, a habit from 31 years of reading trade reports, before dawn that I never managed to unlearn, when I heard a car pull into the driveway too early for a casual visit and too deliberate for a surprise. Priya came in without knocking. She still had that spare key, the one Denise had advised me to let her keep using unaware, for exactly this reason, and set a manila folder on my kitchen table with a small, precise click, the sound of someone placing a chess piece rather than a document. "Walter," she said, and there was a brightness to her voice that didn't match her eyes. "I wanted to come talk to you and Eleanor directly, adult to adult, before things get complicated. I think it's time we had an honest conversation about a plan." I set the newspaper down. Eleanor turned off the stove burner without turning around, which told me she was listening with every part of her attention, even with her back to the room. "What kind of plan?" I said. Priya pulled out a chair and sat, the posture of someone who believed she'd already won whatever this was, and was simply walking us through the formalities. "Nathan and I have been under a lot of financial strain," she said. "I'm not going to pretend otherwise because I think honesty matters here. My business has hit some real turbulence. And I've been doing a lot of thinking about family, about what family actually means in practice, not just in sentiment." She opened the folder. "I think the most loving thing we can do as a family is restructure things so everyone's actually supported, instead of everyone just performing support while quietly struggling alone." Inside the folder was a printed proposal, an actual document, formatted like a business plan, complete with a small pie chart. The headline read, "Cole Family Property and Care Consolidation Plan." I want you to sit with that phrase for a second, because I did, right there at my own kitchen table, and it took me a full 10 seconds to understand I wasn't misreading it. The plan proposed that Eleanor and I relocate to a one-bedroom unit at, of course, Brightwater Senior Living, using proceeds from the sale of the Larkspur Lane property to cover the entrance fee and several years of the monthly rate. Nathan, Priya, and Milo would then move into 414 Larkspur Lane itself, which the document described, with a straight face, as right-sizing the family's largest asset to serve its most active growth phase, meaning, in plain English, that the young family with the growing child should have the big house, and the old people who'd built it should be moved somewhere smaller and out of the way. There was a second page. A rough calculation of projected sale proceeds, with a line item near the bottom labeled Debt Consolidation and Business Stabilization, $91,400. She had done the math. She had done the math on my house paying off her lawsuits. Priya, I said, and I kept my voice level with an effort that cost me more than I let show. You've laid out a plan to sell my home. Use the proceeds to move your mother-in-law and me into a facility we've never agreed to, and pay off business debts you've never once mentioned to us. Is that an accurate summary? Something flickered across her face. Not quite alarm, but recalibration. The look of a person realizing the audience isn't reacting the way the script called for. When you put it that way, it sounds harsh, she said. But Walter, realistically, at your age, in a house this size, wouldn't it be a relief to simplify? To not have to manage the upkeep? To have professional care available if either of you needed it down the road? I've already toured Brightwater. It's lovely. And this way, Milo gets to grow up in the same neighborhood, with the same school district, in a home that's already paid off instead of us starting from zero. Everyone wins. Everyone except Eleanor and me, I said, who apparently don't get a vote on where we live for the rest of our lives. That's not fair, Priya said, and her voice sharpened at the edges now, the pleasantness thinning. I've been carrying this family's future in my head for 2 years, while everyone else just goes on pretending things are fine. Somebody has to actually plan. 2 years, I repeated quietly. Is that when the visitation fee started, Priya? Because I've been keeping records, too. Her expression shifted again, faster this time, something colder settling underneath the polish. The fee was about structure, about Milo having predictable, professional-grade care. Not what? Eleanor said, turning from the stove for the first time, her voice quiet in the way that had always meant she was about to say something neither of us would forget. Not his own grandparents, freely loving him, for free, the way grandparents have loved grandchildren since the beginning of time. You charged us to hold our own grandson, Priya. On his 2nd birthday, you gave us 11 minutes. And this whole time, you were quietly trying to take out a loan against a house that was never yours to borrow against. The kitchen went very still. Priya's eyes moved from Eleanor to me, and something in her face changed. Not remorse. I want to be honest about that, because remorse never really arrived that morning. Not fully. What arrived was the specific fear of someone who suddenly understands the ground beneath her feet is not where she thought it was. How do you? She started, and stopped. I have an attorney, I said, who has spent the last 2 weeks documenting exactly what's been happening in this family. I have security footage of you photographing my estate documents in my own study using a key you were never given for that purpose. I have a copy of a home equity application filed in my name, without my knowledge, using information taken from that filing cabinet that was denied by the lender's fraud department before you got what you needed from it. And I have this. I tapped the folder on the table between us, which, frankly, is the most honest thing you've handed me in 2 years, because at least this time you put the plan in writing instead of hiding it behind a spreadsheet with my name filed under caregivers. Priya's hands had gone very still on the table. Nathan doesn't know about all of this, she said. And for the first time her voice cracked slightly, the polish giving way to something rawer underneath. The application, that was. I was going to explain it to him once it went through. I didn't want to worry him before I had a solution. You forged financial paperwork in my name to solve your business debts, I said, and you were keeping your own husband in the dark about it too. Priya, I don't think you understand yet how much worse that makes this, not better. She stood up so fast her chair scraped hard against the floor. You have no idea what it's like, she said, and now the anger was fully out, raw and unguarded. carrying a family that doesn't even see what it costs to hold everything together. I built a business from nothing. I have never once asked you for a handout the way Nathan used to when he was younger, running to you every time he needed rent money. I was trying to fix this myself, quietly, without embarrassing anyone. By taking my house, I said. By using an asset that's going to sit here empty for both of you eventually anyway. Her voice had climbed now, sharp enough that I heard, faintly, the sound of Milo starting to fuss in his car seat outside, where Nathan had apparently been waiting, not yet come in. You two don't need 6 bedrooms and a garage and a workshop. We need it. Milo needs it. And you'll still be taken care of. Better care than you'd get managing all this yourselves as you get older. That was never your decision to make, Eleanor said, and her voice, when it came, was so quiet and so absolutely certain that it silenced the kitchen more completely than shouting could have. Not for us, not for our home, not without asking. Nathan came in then, Milo on his hip, and stopped dead in the doorway, taking in his wife's flushed, furious face, the folder open on the table, the particular temperature of a room where something has just broken permanently. What's going on, he said slowly, and I watched. With something that hurt more than anger, the moment he understood, really understood, for the first time, the shape of what his wife had been building without him. Nathan, I said, and I reached out, not for the folder, but toward my grandson, who reached back toward me the instant he saw my hand, the way he always had, the way no coordination fee had ever managed to train out of him. I think it's time you and I had a very honest conversation. And I think, given everything, it's time you learned exactly what's actually in that trust your mother and I built back in 1994, long before any of this began. 5. I did not tell Nathan everything that morning. Some conversations need room to breathe, and a kitchen with his wife still standing in it, jaw tight, arms crossed, was not the room for it. Instead, I asked him to come alone, Thursday evening, and, after a long look at Priya that told me more about the state of their marriage than either of them probably wanted it to, he agreed. But between that Tuesday and Thursday, 2 things happened that changed the shape of everything still to come. The first was a phone call from a man named Ray Aldis. I want to tell you about Ray because every story like this one needs somebody standing a little outside the family, watching with clear eyes, and Ray had been that person in my life since before Nathan was born. He'd lived 3 doors down on Larkspur Lane for 30 years, retired now from 26 years with the county sheriff's department, the kind of man who still wakes at 5 out of habit and spends his mornings on the porch with coffee and a scanner radio, watching the street the way some men watch television. He'd known Renee. He'd carried her casket, in fact. One of 6 men who did, and he had never once, in the years since, let a September go by without stopping by on the anniversary just to sit with Eleanor and me for an hour without saying much of anything. Ray called Wednesday morning, his voice carrying the particular flatness he'd used, I imagine, for 30 years of delivering news nobody wanted. "Walter," he said, "I don't want to alarm you, but I think you should know a car's been sitting outside your place more than it ought to be." Dark blue sedan. Man in a sport coat. Sat there Monday for about 20 minutes with a clipboard. Walked the front of your property. Took some photos. Did it again yesterday. I got plates if you want them. My stomach went cold in a way that had nothing to do with the October chill. "Ray," I said, "would you be willing to send me anything your doorbell camera caught?" "And the plate number?" "Already pulled it," Ray said. "Figured you'd want it before you asked." That was Ray, the kind of man who does the work before you know to ask for it. The same way he'd shown up with a casserole 3 days after Renee's funeral without anyone calling him, simply because he understood, the way careful people do, exactly what a family needs before the family itself has found the words to ask. The photo Ray sent showed a trim man in his 50s in a gray sport coat, notebook in hand, standing at the edge of my driveway, photographing the front of the house from 3 different angles. Ran the plate within the hour and called me back with the name Curtis Fenn, a licensed real estate agent working for a company called Swift Home Solutions, one of those cash offer outfits that advertises on late-night television with promises of no repairs needed, close in 10 days. Someone requested a valuation on your property, Denise said. Without your knowledge. I'd bet everything I own it traces back to the same person who filed that credit application. The second thing that happened on Wednesday evening was that Milo's babysitter, the professional grade sitter Priya had insisted on for 2 years, a young woman named Callie who I'd met exactly twice, both times with Priya hovering nearby monitoring the interaction like a compliance officer, called Nathan's cell phone by accident instead of Priya's, the two names apparently sitting close together in her contacts, and left a voicemail meant for his wife. Nathan, rattled by everything already unraveling around him, played it for me himself on Thursday evening, sitting at my kitchen table, his face gray with something between grief and disgust. Hi, it's Callie. I just wanted to check, are we still doing the thing where Milo's grandpa's visits get logged as supervised, in case it comes up later? You mentioned something about documentation for custody purposes if things ever got messy with the house situation, and I want to make sure I'm doing the notes right. Call me back. Custody purposes. If things ever got messy with the house situation, I sat across from my son at my own kitchen table and watched him understand, in real time, that his wife had spent 2 years quietly constructing a paper trail. Supervised visit logs, domication, language about structure and boundaries, not because of any genuine concern for Milo's well-being, but as leverage, in case the fight over the house ever needed a second front. In case restricting a grandfather's access to his only grandchild ever became useful as pressure or as a narrative, if things between the families ever ended up somewhere legal. Dad, Nathan said, and his voice broke on the word in a way I hadn't heard since he was 19 years old, and calling to tell me he'd wrecked his first car. I didn't know. I swear to you, I didn't know it went this far. I knew about the money being tight. I knew she wanted us to talk to you about the house eventually. I did not know about a loan application with your name on it. I did not know she was documenting Milo's visits like evidence. I believed him. I want to be honest about that, because this isn't a story where every villain is equally guilty, and Nathan, whatever his failures of attention over those 2 years, was not the architect of what his wife had built. He was, in his own way, another person she'd been quietly managing, kept comfortable, kept unaware, fed just enough reassurance to keep from asking the questions that would have unraveled everything sooner. I need you to hear something clearly, I told him, and I reached across the table and put my hand over his, the way I hadn't done since he was a boy afraid of a thunderstorm. None of what's coming is a punishment aimed at you, but it is going to be the truth, all of it, laid out where everyone in this family can see it, and I think before that happens, you deserve to know exactly what's actually in the trust your mother and I built the year you turned 3. I told him then about the folding chairs in the hospital hallway in 1994, about the mass that turned out benign, and the caution that outlived the scare, about Otis Bram's careful instructions, and 30 years of a document sitting untouched, waiting for a moment nobody had ever expected would come. I told him that the house had never, not for one single day, been an asset either he or Priya had any legal claim to touch while Eleanor and I were living, and that under the trust's current terms, upon both our deaths, the property would be sold and the proceeds placed into an educational and care fund for Milo, directly administered independently, specifically structured, so that no future spouse of Nathan's or of Milo's own eventually could ever again treat this family's home as a lever to be pulled during a hard season. Nathan sat very still through all of it, and when I finished, he put his face in his hands for a long moment before he spoke. She's going to lose everything, he said quietly. The business. Maybe more, if what you're describing about that application is actually fraud. That, I said, was a decision she made a long time before either of us sat down at this table. I didn't make it for her. 6. The public reckoning, because there was one, and I want to tell it to you the way it happened, without softening it, came 10 days later at Milo's second birthday celebration. The real one this time, not the daycare friends party I'd been given 11 minutes at back in April. Priya had, apparently, been planning it for weeks before any of this broke open. A backyard gathering, 20-some guests, Nathan's co-workers, Priya's business contacts, she was presumably still trying to charm into referrals, despite everything unraveling underneath her, and because canceling it entirely would have raised more questions in her social circle than she was prepared to answer. Eleanor and me invited this time properly, an actual invitation with an actual start time instead of a doorstep negotiation. I believe, looking back, that Priya thought she still had time, that the plan could be quietly buried. The loan application explained away, as some kind of misunderstanding, the Brightwater pamphlet forgotten, if she simply kept moving forward as though nothing underneath had shifted. She had not yet understood that Denise Okafor does not let things get quietly buried, and that a folder with Cole Family Property and Care Consolidation Plan, typed across the top in her own hand, does not unhappen just because the person who wrote it wishes very hard that it would. Eleanor and I arrived at 4 in the afternoon, on time, dressed for a party, carrying a wrapped gift, not the wooden train set this time, which still sat finished and unopened in my garage, a Chekhov's gun I intended to bring out only once this was fully settled, once Milo could enjoy it without it carrying the weight of everything that had happened around it. The backyard was full of balloons and folding chairs, and the particular noise of a 2-year-old's birthday party, 20 adults making the kind of small talk people make while a toddler ignores an elaborate cake in favor of the cardboard box it came in. I found Ray Aldous had somehow, without my asking, positioned himself near the gate. Not invited. Exactly, but Ray had a way of appearing at exactly the moments a family needed a steady, watchful presence, and Eleanor had mentioned the party to him over coffee 2 days before. In the offhand way you mention things to a neighbor you trust completely, Denise Okafor arrived at 5, precisely as we'd planned, in a dark blazer, a slim leather folio under one arm, and the calm, unhurried bearing of a woman who has done this before and understands exactly how much weight her presence alone carries in a room that doesn't yet know why she's there. Priya saw her first. I watched the color drain slightly from her face as Denise crossed the yard toward us, and I watched her glance, instinctively, toward the side gate, as though some part of her was already calculating an exit that wasn't actually available to her. "Priya," I said, keeping my voice pitched for the small circle around us rather than the whole yard. I did not want to humiliate her in front of 20 strangers. I wanted the truth on the table, not a public flaying. "I think it's time we finished the conversation from 2 weeks ago, all the way through. This time, Walter, this is Milo's birthday," she said, low and urgent. "Can we not do this here? You did the fee here," Eleanor said quietly. "You did the 11 minutes here. You did the spreadsheet and the pamphlet and the loan application in Walter's name, and you very nearly did all of it without a single person in this family ever finding out. I think a party is a perfectly fair place to finish it, since you were so comfortable starting all of it in the middle of our ordinary family life." Denise stepped in smoothly, her voice pitched to carry just far enough, to Nathan, standing pale and silent nearby, to a few of the closer guests who had already begun to sense something was happening and gone quiet watching. "Mrs. Cole," she said to Priya, using the surname deliberately, formally, "I'm Walter and Eleanor's attorney. I want to give you the opportunity to hear this directly and clearly, rather than through a letter, because I think you deserve to understand exactly where things stand before any of this moves further." She laid it out precisely, the way she'd laid it out for me at her office weeks before. The untouched, unamendable trust from 1994, the sole trusteeship held exclusively by Walter and Eleanor Cole, the fraud department's flag on a home equity application filed without authorization, using stolen document images, the recorded judgment liens already against Priya's own business, the outstanding vendor lawsuits, the $91,000 debt her consolidation plan had proposed to solve using a house she had never once had legal standing to touch. "This isn't a threat," Denise finished, her voice even and unhurried in the particular way that makes threats entirely unnecessary. "It's simply the truth, laid out where the whole family can see it clearly, so that nobody spends another 2 years operating on assumptions that were never accurate. Walter and Eleanor's home has never been available to anyone but the two of them, for as long as they're living. It never was. No spreadsheet, No application, no pamphlet was ever going to change that. The yard had gone very quiet. Somewhere behind us, Milo, oblivious to everything, shrieked with delight as he successfully climbed halfway into the cardboard box the cake had come in, and the ordinary, unbearable sweetness of that sound against everything else happening in that backyard is something I don't think I'll ever fully separate in my memory again. Priya's face had gone through several expressions in the span of Denise's short speech. Disbelief, then something like fury, then, as the weight of the vendor lawsuits and the judgment liens being said aloud in front of guests fully landed, something that finally looked like fear. Real fear, not performed concern about structure and boundaries. The fear of a woman who has just watched every card in a 2-year plan turned face up on a table in front of people whose opinion of her she still, apparently, cared very much about. "You're humiliating me," she said, low and shaking. "In front of my clients." "You tried to take their home," Eleanor said. "In front of your son." Nathan stepped forward then, and I watched my son do something that, whatever else happens between them in the years ahead, I will always be proud of. He didn't defend her. He didn't attack her either. Not there, not in front of a yard full of people, because whatever else was true, she was still Milo's mother, and still, in that moment, his wife. And Nathan has always understood, better than most people his age, that dignity matters even when trust has broken. But he stood beside his son's grandparents, not beside his wife. And that alone told everyone in that backyard everything they needed to understand about where this family had actually landed. "I think," he said quietly, "we should all go inside and finish this properly. Not here. Not in front of Milo's cake." Denise nodded, satisfied. The public peace had never been about spectacle for her. It had been about ensuring nobody could later claim to have not understood, clearly and in front of witnesses, exactly where things stood. The private conversation, the one that would actually settle what happened next for this family, was still to come, and it would happen that same evening, at my kitchen table, with far fewer people watching and far more at stake. The kitchen emptied out slowly that evening, the way a house does after a party curdles into something else. Guests finding excuses, the cake half-eaten and abandoned under its plastic dome, balloons still bobbing absurdly against the ceiling of a living room that had, an hour earlier, been full of laughter, and now held only the 4 of us and Milo, finally asleep on Nathan's shoulder, unaware that the shape of his family had just changed permanently around him. Priya sat across from me at my own kitchen table, the same table where she'd once laid out a folder titled Cole Family Property and Care Consolidation Plan, with the calm confidence of a woman who believed she'd already won. She did not look confident now. She looked, for the first time since I'd known her, entirely without a script. "I want you to understand something," I said, and I made myself say it slowly, because this part mattered more than the reckoning in the backyard had. "I am not interested in destroying you, Priya. I raised a son who loves you, badly complicated as that love is right now, and you are the mother of the only grandchild I will ever have. Nothing that happens tonight is about revenge for its own sake. It's about making sure nobody in this family ever again mistakes silence for permission." She didn't answer right away. When she finally spoke, her voice had lost every trace of the polish I'd grown so used to over 2 years. The marketing pitch brightness, the vendor negotiation cadence. What was left underneath was smaller, and more honest, and harder to be angry at than I expected. "I was so scared," she said, "of losing everything I built, of Nathan finding out how badly I'd let it slip. I told myself if I could just get ahead of it, solve it before anyone had to know how bad it got, none of it would matter in the end. I told myself the house would basically be ours eventually anyway, so I wasn't really taking anything, just moving up the timeline." "You charged us to hold our own grandson," Eleanor said, not unkindly but not gently either. "That wasn't about the house yet. That started before any of the debt got this bad, Priya. That was about something else." Priya was quiet for a long moment. "I think," she said finally, "I think somewhere along the way I started believing that if I controlled access to Milo, I controlled the family, that it made me matter more, made the decisions mine to make, instead of something I was just along for. I don't think I set out to hurt anyone. I think I just kept choosing the version of things that felt safest for me to be in charge of, over and over, until it turned into this. I won't tell you I forgave her fully that night because I didn't, and I think honesty matters more here than a tidy ending. What I will tell you is what actually happened over the following months, because it's the part of this story I think matters most, more than the folder, more than the backyard, more than the trust document itself. Denise did not pursue criminal fraud charges over the loan application, at my request, though she made it unmistakably clear to Priya, in writing, exactly what she could have pursued and exactly why she was choosing restraint instead. Priya's business ultimately did fold. The debts were real, the lawsuits were real, and no family intervention was going to undo 2 years of financial mismanagement. She and Nathan spent a difficult 6 months in family counseling, which Nathan told me about only in fragments, the way sons tell fathers about the parts of their marriage they're still working out themselves. I don't know everything that happened in those sessions. I know that by spring, Priya had taken a salaried marketing position with a firm in Harrisburg instead of running her own consultancy, trading the independence she'd fought so hard for something steadier, less desperate, less prone to the kind of pressure that had made a $20 babysitting fee feel, to her, like a reasonable place to start building leverage. And I know that the visitation fee stopped. Not gradually. Immediately. The week after that birthday party, without me ever having to raise the subject again. What replaced it over the months that followed was something I want to describe carefully, because it's the part of this story that made all the rest of it worth surviving. Priya began, slowly and without being asked, to include Eleanor and me in ordinary things, a Tuesday dinner, unannounced and unfeed, the way family dinners are supposed to work. A phone call once, in November, just to ask whether I thought Milo was ready to start learning to ride a balance bike, the kind of small, unremarkable question that means far more than it sounds like it should, because it was the first time in 2 years she had asked me anything about my grandson as though my opinion simply mattered, with no fee attached, no coordination required. She did not become, overnight, the daughter-in-law I'd have chosen if I'd been given a choice at the start. Trust does not rebuild on a single apology or a single backyard reckoning, however dramatic. It rebuilds the way a fence gets replaced, one slat at a time, over seasons, by someone willing to keep showing up with the next board even when the last one didn't finish the job. Priya showed up, slowly, consistently, for month after month, in ways too small to make for a satisfying single scene, but too steady, over time, to dismiss as performance. The night after the party, once Priya and Nathan had gone home with a sleeping Milo, Eleanor and I sat on the back porch in the cold October dark, much the way we had 6 weeks earlier when this whole reckoning began. "Do you think it's really over?" Eleanor asked. I thought about the wooden train set still sitting in my garage, sanded smooth, waiting for a birthday that could finally belong to Milo without carrying the weight of everyone else's schemes around him. I thought about 38 years of marriage, of a folding chair in a hospital hallway in 1994, of a document neither Nathan nor Priya had ever known existed until the exact moment it mattered most. "I think," I said, "we finally taught this family something it needed to learn a long time ago, that loving someone freely, without conditions, without a fee attached, is not the same as being a soft target for whoever decides they need something from you badly enough." I took Eleanor's hand, and I think Milo is going to grow up in a family that finally understands the difference. 6 months later, on a warm April afternoon almost exactly 1 year after that first strange doorstep encounter with the daycare friends party, I drove out to Camden Township with the wooden train set finally in the trunk of my car, unwrapped, sanded, every axle smooth enough that a 2-year-old's hands could run over it without finding a single splinter. There was no folder waiting at anyone's kitchen table this time, no spreadsheet, no fee requested at the door. Priya met me on the porch, the same porch where, a year earlier, she'd given me 11 minutes and a rehearsed excuse about sensory regulation, and this time she simply hugged me, briefly, awkwardly, the kind of hug two people give each other when they're still learning how, and said, "He's been asking about the train set you mentioned last month. Go on in, he's been waiting." I found Milo on the living room floor, and when he saw me, he didn't hesitate the way he might have if all that careful, quiet training toward overreliance had ever actually taken. He grabbed my finger with his whole fist, exactly the way he had 2 years earlier, and pulled me down onto the floor beside him with the complete, unguarded certainty of a child who has never once had to wonder whether his grandfather was allowed to be there. Later that evening, sitting on my own back porch with Eleanor, watching the last of the April light fade over Larkspur Lane, I thought about the years it had taken to arrive at this ordinary, unremarkable Tuesday. A grandfather building a train set, a boy delighted by it. No toll booth standing between them anymore. Here is what I want to leave you with, because I think it matters more than the reckoning itself, more than the folder, more than even the trust document that ended up protecting everything I'd spent a lifetime building. If someone in your family has started treating your love as a resource to be rationed, metered, or charged, for whether it's your time, your money, your presence, or your own grandchild's arms around your neck, that is not a boundary. Boundaries protect people. What Priya built for 2 years was a toll booth, and toll booths exist for exactly one reason: to extract something from you on the way to somewhere you already had every right to go. Milo said something to me that same evening, before I left, small and offhand the way children say the truest things without meaning to. He held up the little wooden conductor figure from the train set, turned it over in his fingers and said, "Grandpa's not a visitor. Grandpa lives everywhere." He didn't mean it the way I understood it, sitting on that porch afterward with my wife's hand in mine. But I've thought about it every day since. A grandfather's love was never supposed to need a coordination fee, or a rotation spreadsheet, or 11 minutes on a birthday. It was never supposed to need permission at all. It only ever needed, from the very beginning, the people around it to remember that some things were never theirs to price. If something in this story stayed with you, the folder, the fee, the 11 minutes, or the quiet moment a family finally chose honesty over convenience, I'd love to hear which part landed hardest for you. And if there's someone in your life who's been quietly carrying a weight like the one I carried for 2 years without saying a word, maybe this is the story that finally gives you the words to start. Some elements here were adjusted for privacy, but the truth underneath all of it is exactly as real as it felt to live through. Thank you for staying with me all the way to the end.